When Vince Engel was a hospital corpsman in the Navy, he learned a lesson that lasted a lifetime. His mentor and supervising doctor told him to go sit with two patients who had testicular cancer.
It was clear they were going to die. And one of my assignments with him was to go sit with these sailors, young, 18, 20-year-old sailors dying with testicular cancer, and just sit and talk to them. And there was nothing to do. They didn't need me as a nursing person, but he just said, you need to go sit with this guy. And I was like, really? And yeah, because that's part of medicine.
This is a story about caring for others and how that care can bring a community closer together. It's also a story about a terrifying epidemic, the HIV/AIDS crisis. It's a history of how the crisis shaped communities, including Vince's, in southern and mid-Ohio. Vince's story begins in Portsmouth in southeastern Ohio, about a decade after his tour in the Navy. He was working as a physician's assistant, or a PA. Vince had met a young artist named Paul who had been giving him some advice.
He kind of mocked me because I hadn't been out. I knew my own situation, but between the Navy and between medical school, I didn't have a lot of time to go out and find bars and find other people. And so he kept saying, you got to get up to Columbus, you got to get up to Columbus. And the reason this is important was because just at that point, when he was encouraging me to spend a lot of time in bigger cities and bar hop and everything, he went to San Francisco. And he called me from San Francisco. Now, this was a starving artist with no money. And so I knew a long-distance call from Paul was going to be a big deal. I was shocked to get it. And he said, all that stuff I was telling you about for a couple of months, go to the city, get out in the bars, don't do it. There's something going on in San Francisco, and we don't know what it is, but people are very sick with very unusual symptoms. Eventually, those symptoms became known as Kaposi's sarcoma and a variety of other diseases of the immune system.
Vince is telling the story in an even-keeled way. That's who he is. We're sitting in the dining room of the house that Vince and his husband, Fred, renovated. It's comfortable, with a mix of rustic and modern elements in the design. Vince has a stack of documents in front of him that he uses when he lectures on the history of the AIDS epidemic. He especially values a Time magazine cover with an electron microscope image of the HIV virus, the first such image to be made available to the public. In the story Vince is telling, the news Paul just shared with him from San Francisco is earth-shaking. Listen to these news reports from about this time.
A mystery disease known as the gay plague has become an epidemic unprecedented in the history of American medicine.
That as of yet, no drug has been found that is pronounced effective in combating AIDS.
This depression of the immune system can lead to a rare form of cancer, Kaposi's sarcoma, which shows up as those purplish spots. This cancer has a death rate of 80% 2 years after diagnosis. AIDS also causes unusual infections with death rates of 100% in 2 years. Given the incubation period of 2 years, there could be a major epidemic in the near future.
As this crisis unfolded, with terrifying developments at each turn, Vince would be at the forefront of efforts to educate and comfort those most affected in Ohio.
I was on the lecture circuit because how many rural gay medical people do you know that can lecture on AIDS? And Governor Celeste at the time had established a statewide AIDS project, and I was involved in that. And eventually started the Southern Ohio AIDS Task Force down in Portsmouth, but also was working with the Columbus AIDS Task Force and working with Dr. Michael Pera at OSU on the lecture circuit.
Southeastern Ohio, Vince's base of operations, was not the most friendly place for people who were gay. Vince referred members of that community who were ill to resources in Columbus. Vince himself spent his weekends in Columbus, and he had a saying as he left and returned to his hometown.
I used to joke that when I left Portsmouth, they would change the sign as you approached Portsmouth or left Portsmouth. The faggot is in, the faggot is out. Because it was hard to find other openly gay professionals anywhere in southern Ohio or bordering on West Virginia or Kentucky. So nobody wanted to go that direction. Everybody wanted to gravitate to Columbus or other big cities.
Larger cities like Columbus had the resources to offer vital programs, like this one.
The Columbus AIDS Task Force had a buddy group, and most large cities had that. And they would attach a buddy to a patient, and the buddy would follow that patient till death, which was the ultimate outcome every time until, they found some rudimentary drugs that were pretty rough to take. But so at one time there was, I don't know, probably 100 guys or more acting as buddies to the people that had AIDS, and they would drive them to their appointments or help them get food or help them get social service or just go sit with them. And so that was a real assist out of the Columbus AIDS Task Force and the other big city AIDS task forces. But those of us working day in, day out with this came to a very fast pattern of our behavior, which was we follow anybody that we're following. We help where we can help, but we didn't go to funerals. We just, once somebody died, we had to move on to somebody else, and you couldn't sit through these funerals because they were horrendous. Many times the parents didn't know what was happening. The parents didn't know they had a gay kid. The parents didn't know there was a partner. The parents didn't understand the disease. When I do my talks, I always talk about a personal friend of ours. His parents came to Columbus because the fellow's name was Rick, and he was hospitalized in ICU. And his buddy called the parents and just said, your son's in the hospital and he wants you to come up. And so they came up, and I was assigned to go to the airport to pick him up. And so I picked up a little old couple from Arkansas or Alabama, I think, Baptist people. And I was taking them directly to the house, to Rick's house. He owned a house with a partner. And the mother was like, oh, we can just go to a hotel. And I said, well, you may be here a while, and he wants you to be in his house. But there's a roommate. Oh, well, we don't want to put the roommate out. We don't want to take his room. And I said, no. He and Rick share a room. And the mother, for the whole time that I spent with her over a couple weeks, would just look at me and say, I don't understand anything you're saying. I don't understand anything you're saying. How can they be sharing a room? How can they own the house together? And nobody will tell me what's going on with my son. Well, they did. The doctor did explain everything, but they couldn't grasp it because they were from a southern rural state where AIDS was not discussed, and they probably didn't read those articles if it was in their paper at all. And we saw that repeated. We saw that repeated time and time and time again.
Jack wanted to know how helpers like Vince made it through such a crushing time.
You have to find a way to get away from that. And I'm wondering, did that start then? How did you survive that mentally?
Well, I had so many friends working in this system, this, lay people system and professional system, and we did a lot of social stuff. We had people over at our house all the time, and didn't discuss AIDS. I mean, we just had I joined the GAP, the Gay and Professional Ski Club. I'd never skied in my life, but it was a social outlet with a bunch of gay guys. And Fred was in the Gay Men's Chorus, and a lot of the founders of the Gay Men's Chorus were our personal friends, and we participated a lot in the Gay Men's Chorus as an outlet that was not AIDS focused.
Vince mentioned Fred there. His husband now, the two started their relationship in the midst of the crisis. He describes the steps they went through to arrange their union and what happened when the epidemic landed at the center of their relationship.
We became a couple in '88. We took out domestic partnership papers because that was one of the things that we always counseled people to do, because hospitals wouldn't let a partner come visit if there wasn't some legal document of some sort. So we took out domestic partnership on a trip to Provincetown, big gay mecca where the clerk of the courts was familiar with doing those documents. And then we did springing medical powers of attorney, which we counseled everybody to do, powers of attorney for financial issues, and documents with our attorneys with wills and medical directives. That's one of the things we counsel everybody to do. So we had all those papers, and I can't really tell you the year that Fred was diagnosed. And what we had counseled people to do was get tested when they entered a relationship, and we had. But there's a dormant period, and, things happen.
Jack notices a sign over Vince's shoulder hanging on the wall. It says, "Friends are the family you choose." Jack wonders if the trials of the epidemic forged in Vince and Fred their sense of community. Vince and Fred love to share their home. When friends adopted 2 children, Vince and Fred stepped in as a major support system, taking the kids on weekends, investing in the children's lives and futures. During the COVID pandemic, Vince and Fred made food for the hometown fire department, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, throughout the depths of that crisis.
I've always thought that since I moved to this town, that you and Fred demonstrate how to build community in a lot of ways that people don't see. And you've just described a full frontal effort by our entire community to try to save lives. How has that shaped how you think about the world that you live in?
Well, our personal situation, we both had birth families. And for very different reasons, we developed our own gay family, almost to the exclusion of the birth families. We just found more acceptance, not because of the gay thing. Well, Fred's mother hated me, but other than that, and my family was accepting. My dad was dead already. He would never have accepted it, but he was dead by then. And my mom, at one point, was sick in the hospital, and Fred went up with me because his brother, with AIDS, was sick in the same hospital in Chicago. So we visited both of them, and we walked into my mother's room, and the nurse looked at us with 22 years difference in age and said, "Oh, son and grandson." And my mother, I saw the look on her face. And I thought, now, is she going to say something or not? And she said, "No, actually, son and son-in-law." And then went on to say, actually, my favorite son-in-law, because she had 2 others she wasn't fond of. But we built our own community. And as I said, those guys, the core group of that group, still get together with us every time we're in Provincetown. That's our little core family. It's the group that has, for more than 30 years, spent most Thanksgivings and Christmases together.
Vince then tells a story that illustrates the bond of the core group of friends that has been their chosen family for over 30 years. This story centers around Steve, a friend whose partner died of AIDS. When he established a new relationship, he had a desire to share it with his family of origin.
So at one point, Steve kind of bit the bullet and said, I want to bring the guy that I live with to Thanksgiving. And he was living in Atlanta at the time. And then he called me and said, my parents just called me and told me we're not welcome at their Thanksgiving. And what are we going to do? I said, we're going to take the turkey from here and put it in our van and pick up Phil, and we will be in Atlanta tomorrow. And we did that. And we did that with Steve, either him coming up here with David or us going wherever he was, and he was in some really great places, for many, 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 many years. It wasn't until the pandemic that we cut back on those visits, and now it's mainly my birthday that we all get together on. Almost everybody we know has a core group that went through this, because we were all together during the AIDS crisis. And we were all together when we lost Rick, and we were all together when Fred was diagnosed and ill, and a couple of other people that had been part of that group that have died. But we all gather. And as I said, we always gather in Provincetown because that was Mecca. That was the place we could go and just be ourselves and not worry about holding hands or not being worried about called a faggot when you walk down the street.
By the time Fred was diagnosed with AIDS, AZT was available. Vince calls AZT a horrible drug because of the side effects. But it worked well enough to get people like Fred to the next, slightly less horrible drug.
And then the next one, and each iteration of the drug would be less toxic. Maybe fewer side effects, or maybe fewer pills during the day. When Fred talks about it, which is kind of rare, he doesn't do the lectures with me, he'll say, I started at 28 pills a day, and now I'm down to 1.
When Vince tries to sum up what living through the AIDS epidemic has meant to him, it takes him back to a time before the crisis, back to what he learned as a medic in the Navy, sitting by those 2 sailors in their last days.
It gave us a perspective on life and death. Anybody involved in those years had a real education in something that I taught about way before AIDS. I used to lecture to nurses and say to nurses, the end result of all of our treatment is people die. You don't have any patient that is going to live forever. So as you're working with people, doctors, nurses, medical students, I've lectured a lot, you have to understand that we're living on this life continuum, and you're not going to save everybody, and you have to prepare people.
Vince is 81 years old now as he sits at his kitchen table and tells Jack and me these stories. He looks good. He's got color in his face and clarity in his mind. You wouldn't know that he has 2 types of cancer, and he is foregoing treatment for both. The first to be diagnosed was bladder cancer.
I had said to the surgeon, you can do the surgery and we'll see what comes out after the surgery, see what the tumor is and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure I'm going to go into your protocol. And I talked to other people that had bladder cancer and had that treatment. And some said don't do it and some said do it. And so I started it. But I got hospitalized in intensive care twice because of the treatments and said, enough, not going to do it. I don't want to die here in the hospital. I'm going back to Provincetown. And that, I'm going back in September. I get a scan next Tuesday that will tell us what the progressions are. And my doctor agrees with me. He said, at 81, you want to go 3 times a week and lay on a gurney and get pumped full of poison? If you want it, fine. If you don't, fine. I don't wake up every morning thinking I'm going to die. I wake up every morning asking myself, can I do my 4-mile walk? I try to walk 4 miles a day. And when I first put my feet out of bed, I say, I may not be able to do the walk. We'll see. And then I sit in the recliner and sip coffee and get my shower. And then I think, you know what? It's a beautiful day. It's not 90 degrees. I believe I can go walk in my private park, which happens to be a university campus, and then walk downtown. There are debates at times. I'm going alone to Provincetown in September. So I don't have Fred there. And the group is not going to gather in September, so I'm not going to have Steve and David and Fred around, and Phil. But I have made friends with the hotel staff. We've been going there for 15 years. And the hotel staff assures me, if you need to go to Boston, we'll get you to Boston. If you need to go to Hyannis, which is the closest hospital, which is a couple hours away, we'll get you to Hyannis. So those are non-issues. I feel better when I'm in Provincetown. I'm more active. The weather is conducive to me being outside most of the time in the day. And so that's kind of what I focus on.